Hey everybody, I'm here today. The weather is really nasty outside, so I came over to Gordy's house and we're going to be doing a chainsaw tune-up today. So this saw is kind of how me and Gordy became friends about 4 years ago. I saw him on Instagram. I saw that he lived in Maple Valley. I live in Enumclaw, it's pretty close. I'd never heard of chainsaw building or porting or anything like that at the time. And at the time, we both had really small Instagram followings. I asked him to build this saw for me, so he ported it. This is a Stihl MS661, so it's a 90cc chainsaw. And he built this for me like 4 years ago, right?
It's about exactly 4 years.
Yeah, so about 4 years ago. So I've been running this saw for 4 years, and I've done basically no maintenance to it. You know, I kind of like clean the saw out. I clean the air filter, not even that often. And I've cut like a lot of trees with it. It's, like I said, it's been a lot of years. It's kind of crazy looking back because I mean, Gordy was like working a 9-to-5 job back then, porting saws after work, and it's been cool to see how far he's come along. He doesn't even port saws anymore, really. He like makes aftermarket saw parts, which like the dogs and everything, and the bark box, and so he's got parts on this saw. But yeah, he didn't even have the bark box or
Didn't even have it when you met me. Yeah.
He didn't have any parts of his own when he built this saw originally. It's evolved a little bit over the years. It's been a really great saw. It runs well still, but I just noticed the other day it's not running as good as it used to. And I was like, hey, Gordy, I'd really like to make a video, you know, showing people, like, let's go through the 661, go through everything, give it a tune-up so that it can run really well and it can last a really long time. So we've got the saw here. We're in Gordy's shop. And I'll kind of just get behind the camera now, and Gordy's going to tell us what's in store for this project here.
So basically, like, knowing what Jacob's done with this saw, and it doesn't have logger hours on it, and he's kept it in relatively good, decent shape. I knew from what Jacob's done that it's going to need a clutch drum, a sprocket, and I think I actually replaced the sprocket once on this saw. Jacob had a bolt that stripped out, and I fixed it. He brought it in and I put a new sprocket on it. So this is the original drum, and that's the second sprocket that it's had on it. But I knew that it'd need fuel filters and spark plug and all that stuff. So I just gathered up everything. I got piston, base gasket, wrist pin bearing. I got a clutch bearing there, fuel filter, tank vent, new spark plug, of course, and the clutch drum. I usually put these on the 661s, and I'll show you how these go on. They're kind of nice to have, and I got the part number and everything if one of you guys want to start putting those on your saw. But I figure I'm just going to tear into this thing a little bit. I did
You eat that box somewhere else, buddy.
Come on, bud. So I did kind of open the saw up a little bit, and I went to pull the spark plug wire off, and I found Jacob's problem when he said it wouldn't start, and it's right here. So immediately I found that it was broke off of the wire, and it's been making contact. Probably when it was pushed down, it would be hard to start, and then once he got it spinning, it was making enough contact to run the saw. But right there is why it was not probably starting good, and we're gonna find out once we get it all fixed. But
Yeah, it would start, but it was difficult. And then once it was running, it was pretty good. But yeah, that's cool you found that.
I'll just start pulling this thing apart and see how it goes.
Cool. So what's the first thing we're working on right now?
I'm just gonna pull the carburetor off.
All right.
To pull this throttle linkage off, and a good way to do it is I just hold the throttle wide open, and then I hold the butterfly with that finger so the linkage comes back, and then you can just grab it with your pliers and it comes right off. It's really easy. Back side of the intake. I'm gonna pull this carburetor open on the back here just to see how his screen looks inside. There's a screen inside the bottom of this carb that's keeping debris from getting into that solenoid. And most of the time they're pretty clean, but if you run, you know, a lot of fuel through, you're bound to get some what they call smoo, whatever anybody calls it. It's kind of like, it looks kind of glassed over on the screen. It's not like heavy. And that's the screen right there. And these are pretty much in all saws right here. This is where the fuel's coming into it, travels through that port there, and then travels through the screen to get into the jets. So if this screen is full, your carburetor will not get any fuel through it whatsoever. Sometimes these come right out. Just gotta be careful because they can fly. Okay. So that one's pretty clean. I don't know if you can focus in on that. There's a couple little deals right there.
Okay.
And one good way is just take it and set it up to the light and try to look through it. And you can kind of see this one's, it's kind of got some glaze on it. It's not all the way glazed over, but just from normal fuel going through it. And I like to take a brake cleaner and clean this thing. I don't know if you can see that or not. You can see right through the screen now.
Oh yeah, you can see through it. Yep.
Yep. So that screen's really clean now. So we'll put that back in. And this is a good thing to look at on any saw when you're tearing it apart. Just normal maintenance wear and tear. You can just push it right back in with a screwdriver. So it's kind of at the bottom of the port there. All right, we're putting this back together. I got the screen sitting there. And then we're gonna roll to fuel filter next and tank vent. So I always like to check the fuel lines, see if they're in good shape. This fuel line is still in nice shape. It's not like really squishy or rotten or anything.
How do you know if they're in bad shape?
You'll feel it, and most of the time they'll be really soft. I'm gonna leave the carburetor off. I'm not gonna put it on because we are pulling the cylinder off this thing. So tank vents are right here, and most of these tank vents are all the same.
Where do you buy all these parts? You just go to like a local Stihl shop and fill them?
Everything's from Stihl.
Yeah.
So when you put these tank vents in, they just press straight down in, all the way down till they're seated so you can't go anymore. And now we're just gonna change the fuel filter. I got these little, these are surgical clamps. I got them from Big Phil years ago. He got them from some medical center.
Huh.
Yeah, this probably held somebody's vein after they got shot or something. So they work really good for just grabbing the fuel line like so. And I just pull the fuel line out, pull the old filter off. I feel this fuel line too. This fuel line's fine.
Fuel filter, just like that.
Just like that, all done. Shove it back into the tank where it goes all the way to the bottom again. So now let's roll on to the clutch. So fuel system's pretty clean. You got filters done inside the tank, tank vent, and the screen. So anything that's gonna restrict flow to this carburetor has already been changed, and you're gonna be venting nice and not have any vapor lock. Okay, we're on to the clutch. So this is an inboard clutch, and the reason why they call them that is that the clutch is inside the case. Clutch is basically countersunk into the case, and the clutch is behind it. They have an outboard clutch that's out like this. Some of the Husqvarnas have it where the clutch is actually visual out here and the sprocket runs on the inside. This is, I call them free floaters, where the sprocket is actually riding on these outside splines. And some clutches actually have paddles where the chain will actually run, and it doesn't have a sprocket, so you have to change out the whole sprocket. You just have to look at what saw you have. Most of the pro saws all have this. So some of the homeowner saws and different models might have a paddle wheel style. This is called a full floater. And the way you get it off, just gonna pop this down. This little ring will fly, so you just wanna be careful not to lose that. It's got a washer right here. And then the sprocket will come right off the splines right here. And we're gonna talk about the sprocket being wore out. So most of the time there's gunk and stuff built up on the outside of the drum when you go to pull it off. So I'll take a set of vice grips, put it right on the end of the splines, and you can just yard it right off. This is your bearing right here. And to start off with, I see this every time I pull a saw that's used apart. They're always dry. And this is a really good maintenance tip for anybody that's wanting to go through their saw. This thing should get some grease on it. Every time you put this together, it should have a little bit of grease on it, not a lot, because you don't want it getting into your clutch system or anything like that. This here should be greased, and the reason why is because when you have your saw, when you're cutting, your clutch is locked up, so that bearing's not turning. But as soon as you stop and the saw is idling, that clutch is just spinning on that bearing. So when that bearing spins with no grease on it, I have actually seen, this is the end of the crankshaft, I've actually seen saws wear the end of the crankshaft out to where the drum gets sloppy and it sounds like a cowbell when it's idling. And it's usually like on the old, you know, flat top 066s, I've seen it, where saws that have a lot of wear, and nobody ever greased that little bearing. So always grease that little guy. It's nice to know that, because then it saves life on your crank and everything. So on a clutch, I'll inspect this clutch, but clutches last quite a long time. So one thing to look at when you're looking at a clutch is make sure all the springs are there. The way the clutch works is obviously when you hit the throttle, it spins out against the outside of the drum. As these get wore, the one indication that they're wore is these grooves right here that the spring grabs onto. There's little holes. They can get oblonged, these little holes right here. And these will get oblong, which causes the spring not to pull the clutch back, and the drum will start riding, and you'll get the clutch dragging on the drum, and that's when your chain tries to turn at idle. You'll either have a broken spring, or you'll start to get these grooves in here where these springs have moved so much they wear these holes out. And then the other thing is just wear and tear. Like his clutch right here is really tight. There's no movement. If you get a worn out one that's really bad, this is all sloppy. It moves around, and it basically is all worn out in here. This clutch is in good shape. Don't need to replace any clutch springs or anything like that. I don't know of any way really to measure the clutch wear. I just go until they're beyond repair. Like this one here is in really good shape. So I'm just gonna put a new drum on this, new bearing, and we're gonna put her back together.
All right, so we got the sprockets.
Okay, so this is the old drum, sprocket, all the washers and bearings. So I'm gonna replace this drum. His drum's not in bad shape, but this is where the clutch rides in here, and there will be some wear eventually. You can kind of see where the clutch rides right here, and this will get really rough. And it's good not to let it get completely tore up, because then it's obviously your clutch is getting tore up too. But I can feel like there's probably a good 15 thousandths of groove right there that's already worn into this. So if you imagine that clutch has to expand inside of this drum in order to lock up, the further the clutch has to go once this gets wore. So what happens is you keep, you know, wearing on this drum, and it's kind of like a brake shoe. It's going to wear the same pattern as the drum does. So if you have a groove in here, it's going to wear on your clutch. So I like to change them out before it gets to that point. So the more that clutch has to expand, the more it's wearing on your clutch. If your clutch only has to move this much and back, it doesn't wear as much on your springs and the grooves that I previously talked about. If that clutch has to move a long ways, it's a lot more movement. So this drum is getting changed. Now, this sprocket here is an easy item to change out. And I was just at Oregon Tool yesterday talking to Glenn and Randy, and they had some really good pointers about changing out sprockets and drums, because they build these. So I actually asked the question, when is a good time and how do I know when to do it and all that? And what they said was this sprocket will last 3 to 4 chains being completely wore out. So when you wear out 3 to 4 chains, it's time to change this sprocket. And he said the other way to tell is, this is your surface here. There's a new sprocket, and you can see where the chain rides here, it's all flat. And this one has a groove in it where it's been wore out. So he says from this flat surface down to where you're wore out is around 20 thousandths of an inch wear, and that's the limit. And actually what happens is your chain going down deeper in the sprocket makes the chain actually push on the pins, and then it goes out of the sprocket and it's pulling back open again. Then it goes back around the bar and it pushes back in. So having a worn out sprocket will actually cause your chain to stretch. If you had a brand new chain, you put it on and you cut one tree, you just stretched your chain on this old junk sprocket because of the way that the grooves are and everything. As the tolerances get tighter, it starts to push pressure onto that pin, is what I was told. So they said you can get 2 sprockets, 2 life sprockets to 1 drum. So if you wear out 2 of these, it's time to change the drum, is a good rule of thumb. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I never knew that until I met with those guys yesterday. So I actually mic'd Jacobs, and he's right at 20 thousandths. So I don't know if you can.
Yeah, you can really see the grooves, the indentations in there.
Yeah.
And the other one's totally flat. That's interesting. That's wild. It's just the chain just eating its way down.
Yeah, I should put a chain in here and see if I can kind of explain it. Okay, so as this chain is going around and it's coming into your sprocket, kind of what they explained was as these grooves get deeper, the chain is having to go down in there, and there's movement in the pins because it's going down into that hole. So the pins are going towards each other, and then it goes like this and comes out of the sprocket. Now it's on the other direction because it's pulling with the saw running. So now you got the pins going this way, and then it's going that way, and then it's going this way, and as it goes around the unit. So that's how they explained how it's stretching the chain. I never knew that before. I was just changing these out when I thought they were junk. So we're gonna put new drum on, new bearing, new washer, and new sprocket. So what I like to do, like I said, is put a little grease on that bearing. Doesn't have to be a ton of grease. Just take your screwdriver, rub it inside, a little bit outside. And this is just wheel bearing grease. You can use the white lithium, the red lithium, really doesn't matter. And now shove it on the end of the crank. So one thing to keep in mind when you put these drums on is there's a groove in it right here, and that is for the oiler arm. And behind the clutch, there's an arm that slides into. So that oiler spins off of the back of the drum. So the way I do it, some guys will like find the arm and look straight down and match it up. I just set it on there. I just keep turning it till you hear it go clink. Just like that. And it makes that little noise. And now you're all the way home on the oiler. Like that's out of the oiler, and then it'll make that little noise and it'll go down. There she goes. Did you hear the little clink?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, so now that's on there. Sprocket goes on. I always put the letters outside in case anybody ever wanted to see what sprocket you had. Washer goes on. Okay, washer's on, and I got the lock ring just sitting on top. I usually take a little screwdriver and just tap it right down on the crank. And right there, and it's all the way in. One thing I want to add on the old drum and the old sprocket is you can start seeing how that's getting a lot of wear on the splines. That sprocket gets wore on those splines. It starts getting loose, so that's another way to look at your clutch drum. All right, so clutch is all good. We're all fixed up there. We're gonna work on the spark plug now. This was the item that I found that was broke on Jacobs. This wouldn't be a normal fix it or maintenance item that you would have to worry about. This is just something that I found on Jacob's saw, and I'll just show you on camera how I fix them. Sometimes these break, and it's supposed to have a little arm on it like this, and you'll see how I put it on, but it grips into the wire, and then it goes onto into your spark plug wire. So I'm just gonna take this thing out of here, and I'm probably gonna struggle with this, so you guys can bear with me. So that wire was completely broke off right there. You can see it still in the wire. So if you're ever gonna do one of these, just pull it out, and then take your cap, and you gotta get your wire back through this cap. And you gotta leave yourself enough room here to get down. I'll pull this hood off, So what I do is I'll get the wire to where I can see it, and I grab it with my pliers and pull it through the cap. Okay, so I'm pulling it through the cap. You can see it coming out. I'm sliding that down the wire, giving myself lots of room. So now I got the wire sticking up, and I want to put the new wire into it. So I'll put it back into the original hole that it was, because it's still in good shape. It's not tore or anything. Take your pliers and push it down in there. Now, what I got to do is pull this boot back over that, but when I do, they have a tendency to try to come out of the wire. So one thing you can do is just wrap a little tape around it to hold it into the wire to allow the cap to come over the top without it coming out. Don't have to get crazy with it, just maybe 2 wraps. So now that's held onto the wire, it can't come off. So now I'm gonna slide that cap over. I'm trying to be somewhat gentle without, there she goes. Kind of got my pliers already on it, so I'm sinking it home inside the cap. Okay, she's fixed. Done with that.
4 minutes. You said it'd take 10.
Did I?
Yeah.
I got lucky. Okay, so now I'm gonna tear into the cylinder. We're gonna pull the jug off, take a look at the piston, look at the chrome in the cylinder, see how we're doing in there, see if there's any scratches or anything that's got some damage. It's probably to the point here where we're gonna have to put a piston in it, and I'll ball hone the cylinder, put the new piston in it, put it all back together, and get her back on the road. So first thing you do is you pull the muffler off. I like to go through and just loosen all the bolts first with my hand, and then I got the drill here, and I got this chuck. This is a 27 Torx. If you're ever gonna do the drill, just make sure you put it on the numbers, because the numbers will act as a ratchet and it won't break your bolts off. But it works pretty good. I'm gonna can this decompression plug because it's been leaking a little bit right here.
Okay.
And that's kind of normal for a saw this age. I actually like to put plugs in them, and then it's just,
Because the saw loses compression out of that.
yeah, and you're not using it anyway, you know? I don't know. Maybe you are with those little arms.
You know what's funny is I actually just recently did start using the decomp button.
Oh, did you?
I never like tried before, and the other day with my 395 I pushed the button and I was like, oh, this is really easy to start.
Next thing you know, you want electric start. And
Yeah, I know, but it's just funny, like all these years I've just never even looked at that button, and I was like, I'll try this thing out. It's actually kind of nice. I'm getting old, you know?
ancient.
Yeah.
So I'll just loosen the cylinder bolts here. Damn, I was strong back then.
Yeah, 4 years ago. That was back when you were still working a regular job, you know?
Hanging out with you has made me soft. There she be. Man, a good customer would have actually washed their saw before they dropped it off, but you don't expect
And
a
no,
lot.
actually, you know what? I was going to, and you were like, hey, just leave the saw here. I'm going to be working on it anyways. I would have washed it.
This is what he does to me every time.
We were working together, and you were like, oh, just leave that with me.
One thing on these 661s, this boot has a tendency to crack, so they kind of crack around the base, so it's good to kind of pull on it, look at it, see if it has any tears or not. Jacobs is in good shape, so I'm gonna go ahead and just pull it off there because I want to get a good clean on this cylinder. And
What are you looking for there?
I'm looking for any damage in the chrome or any spots that might get thin, any scratches on the intake side or exhaust side. And if you see vertical lines, sometimes you can look into the front of your exhaust port with a flashlight and you'll see all these scratches, and they look super bad sometimes, even on a brand new saw. If you can take your fingernail and run across them and you don't feel any fingernail grabbing at all whatsoever, the chrome is savable. It's not ruined. So if you run your fingernail across it and you feel it grab and it's substantial, then the cylinder's done. I wouldn't even attempt to ball hone it or anything. Jacobs is in really good shape. I can't believe it's not worse, being how he runs his stuff.
Yeah. Tried to run really sharp chain and ethanol-free fuel, and I let the saw warm up. I try to be really gentle to it, you know.
This cylinder's in really good shape. What oil are you running?
I use the Stihl synthetic. It's like just the, it's like 50 to 1, I think, and you just dump it in the 5-gallon mixer, you know.
You've been
Like-
running VP though for a long time.
Oh, actually, I've ran a lot of VP in that, actually.
A lot of VP because I sold it to you.
probably more VP than the Stihl synthetic,
Yeah, 'cause
actually.
this isn't Stihl synthetic oil. Look here. This is.
You're right. And
Nice and
okay,
clean.
so VP
You can even see on the top of the exhaust port how clean it is. Like, look at that.
Yeah, so recently I started using the Stihl mix because that's just like what was at the shop and I just grabbed a bunch. But I actually was running VP for most of the saw's life.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, the VP is what we got you on, I remember.
So maybe I'll stick with that then. And you're saying it's a lot easier to replace the piston than the cylinder, right? And so it's good to do the piston before you have to do the cylinder,
Can
right?
you see,
I remember you
can
talking
you see
about
the
this.
front here? So Jacob's piston on the front here, it looks really good. Like, you can see machining marks in it. It doesn't have any melting marks. I mean, there's tiny little scratches. That's just normal. I mean, there's no cracks in the skirt. You can see above that ringland where the machining marks are starting to go away, and it's a little bit like shiny right there. That's where she was starting to rock. The piston was rocking back and forth in the cylinder just because of the wear and tear. And I'm imagining that the intake side of this piston is going to look worse. There's the intake. It's bad.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
See the scratches?
Yeah, I do.
So
It's just from normal wear and tear, right?
that could be a little bit of wear and tear. Like, I'll show you the wear and tear, and then I'll show you what they call ingestion. Right here on the bottom of the skirt, that's wear and tear. And it's just normal. These pistons rock back and forth in the cylinder, especially once they lose tolerance. And you can see his is right on the verge. I mean, all the machining marks are gone. The rest of this is probably like, it looks like it's taken on a little bit of dirt, possibly, and then it was just getting to where the aluminum was giving way.
You know, I've been really negligent about cleaning my air filter as often as I should. Do you think that'll wear the cylinder?
Oh, absolutely, because you're bringing particles through, and the first spot that's going to show those particles is right on the intake side of that piston. Luckily, your cylinder's still in good shape, so we're going to be able to save this without putting a cylinder in it. So
That's interesting. So the piston wore before the cylinder.
yeah, the chrome's harder than the aluminum. So you got a cast aluminum piston. That's the softest part of the interior.
It's interesting. So probably wore because I just don't clean my air filter often enough.
How often are you doing it?
I don't know. Every once in a while, I just kind of open it and.
Yeah. So
I don't know.
it doesn't take much to get these lines in here. You could have, a bad day and not put your filter on and cause that in one day easily. The other thing, when I get down in here, I'm going to pull this piston off. I always look at the crank, and I'll show you what I look for in the crank.
Okay.
But I'm going to start pulling this piston out. I mean, the intake side being, a lot of lines like that is totally normal, for a saw this age. It's just, it's not or if it'll happen, but when the dirt comes through, eventually
Right.
there's just ingestion, and you can't get around it. And that's why I always say, if you want to show them that.
Yeah, you can see the wear.
And the exhaust side looks good.
Right.
So this is where the heat would be, and this is where the intake, where he took on a little bit of dirt and the wear and tear. So when this thing is in that cylinder, it's wanting to rock, and it's rocking on this side, so it's rocking on that edge and this edge constantly every time it goes up and down. And once these tolerances get out, this thing wants to rock even more. So it's always a good idea to take a look at your pistons and do preventative maintenance, because these cylinders are spendy. I mean, that cylinder was $400+ I just put one on Garrett's.
Wow.
Yeah.
And the piston is how much?
Piston's $105 I think I paid for it.
So yeah, replace the piston before it eats away at your cylinder.
Yep.
Then makes sense.
So I just pulled the wrist pin bearing out. There's probably nothing wrong with this wrist pin bearing, but since this saw's the age that it is, I'm gonna go ahead and replace it. Going on to the crankshaft now. What I'll look for is any discoloration, any blueness. Blue will indicate heat, that it got hot in the bearing or anything, or this crank looks really nice. And in the bottom of this case down here, it's kind of like a painted coating. None of this is like indicating that it took on any big chunks or a lot of debris or anything like that. Sometimes if you get a saw that's taken on a lot of debris, you'll get some wear marks in here where the lobes constantly go around, but Jacob's saw looks really good in here. This crank looks nice. There's no play in anything.
Clean my saw out like constantly.
Yeah.
Like try to keep the dirt out of it all. I've just noticed when I clean the saw, with like just getting all the gunk and everything off of it, I just feel like they last longer. They do better, you know?
I mean,
like sometimes I'll be cleaning it and I just notice like, oh, a bolt's missing, and then you just like replace it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, whereas if you just never...
Well, it does help to clean your saw. So, I mean, if you pull this starter cover off and pressure wash inside of here, this is your cooling fins. When this thing goes around, it's throwing air against the cylinder fins, and this is what cools your cylinder. So if the cylinder's getting hot, that piston's getting hot, and then pretty soon your crank's hot and everything else. So if you got a bunch of gunk and bar oil and all the pine needles and everything rammed in here and it's not cooling, especially your fins, like your fins are all clean, everything's good, there's no fins broke off, that thing is as clean as the day it came out of here pretty much. I mean, it has some surface dirt, but there's not like... So yeah, you have done a good job of keeping it pretty clean. I like to take the rings off the piston because I like to lube the ring land before I put them back on. I don't like to leave the rings on because it's dry underneath the rings, and then you're starting the saw and you're just no lube. So this piston will come with a wrist pin and the 2 circlips. What I do is I like to put the passenger side in first because I like to put this side in last because it's easier for me to get to, because I can't get to this side with my wrench, so I'll finish on this side over here, but these circlips go in there. And when you're putting these circlips in, that little notch right there is to get your tool in to get them out. You don't want to line your gap up with that, because if the next guy comes in, he can't grab the circlip to get it out. So you want it kind of staggered, kind of like that, like so, kind of off, so you're able to grab that corner. Okay, so circlip is in there, and I make sure that it's in the groove all the way. That's good. So if you're gonna put these pistons in, you want lube. So you can just use any mix oil, doesn't matter. And get it into them ring lands where them rings are gonna sit. So now it's lubed up in there. Lube your wrist pin, and the arrow on the piston always goes forward. So I like to shove my wrist pin in there to make sure that it's kind of moving freely. And if they aren't, I have a tool that fixes them, but I have one of these. If you have a used piston, your wrist pin doesn't move freely through that piston. You can clean it up with one of these, run this in and out about twice, and it'll be perfect. I can't even tell you where I got that thing, but okay. Piston's going back on. Let's see, where's my bearing? So this is your wrist pin bearing. I'll just saturate it in oil and then put it back into the crank, like so. So arrow always goes forward. Let it slide down over the cranks like so, and then you just kind of push it with your thumb. There it goes. And I shove it all the way home, so it's all the way against the other pin. And now I have that groove right there to put my other block ring in. Okay, so I set it in there. There's the little groove in the piston. I hold it with my thumb and it just walks right in. Just like so. And then just take your screwdriver and make sure that it's all the way down into that groove. And that one's sunk all the way. And that's the gap right there. And there's the spot to take it back out, so a guy could always take it back out.
Gordy's got a really nice video on his channel all about cylinder and piston wear that you can check out. He goes into a bit more depth on it. Gordy's got a YouTube channel too, West Coast Saw.
And these piston rings, you can get to the piston pin there. I put the one side on first, and I'll just walk it right on, like so. So that one's on, and then the other piston pin is in the back. So I always put the right against the piston pin there, and then just walk it right on. Boom, done. Okay, so now we're gonna hone this cylinder with a ball hone. You can order these online on Bailey's Chainsaw, and they come in different grits. I want to say they're like 320 and 240. I use the 320 because I'm not planning on taking huge amounts out. I only want to put cross hatching back into this chrome to give that ring and piston a new life to start, so it's not starting in the old piston's groove. So we're gonna clean it up. So I got my ball hone in the drill and we're ready to roll. I got a little bit of flex hone oil here and some WD-40, and I'll show you when I get over to the garbage can here how all that works. But you just want lube in the cylinder when you're gonna put this cross hatching back in. You don't want to do it dry. So I'm just lubing up ball hone there. I like to put a little bit of oil on it. And that's the cylinder down there. I'll give her a little bit. Okay, so basically, just want to run this thing in and out a couple of times. Don't have to get crazy. Jacob's cylinder's in really good shape, and I'm just trying to put the cross hatching back in it. That's probably enough. Let's see if I have enough brake cleaner here. So I was telling Jacob off camera here that his cylinder's in really good shape for being that old. There is one little scratch right there, but I can't feel it. It's just cosmetic. There's nothing there. But there's no wear through the chrome or anything like this. Cylinder is in awesome shape. So just by doing this preventative maintenance on this piston, saved this cylinder. And port job's not cheap from anybody. So to save the cylinder and the port job, it's like $900,
Right, so especially important if the saw's ported.
Yeah.
Just swapping out the piston. Because
Okay.
all the work happens on the cylinder. Makes a lot of sense.
Put intake boot back on before I put the cylinder on. There we go. It's got a little mark right there that it's got to line up with. Okay, so we're gonna put the cylinder on. We got the intake on, and always put a little lube in the cylinder before you slide things home. And what I use, you can get these from Husqvarna, and I don't know what website I got these off of. This works really good to compress the rings, and I'll show you how this works. A lot of guys don't use this bottom piece, but I do. It just goes underneath the piston like that, and then this is the ring compressor. Goes around the rings. You got to line up the piston rings with the pin. Okay, so now the rings are held. I left a little bit of piston corner there to slide the cylinder over to get it started. And all you do is take the cylinder, set it onto the piston, and then you're just going to push straight down and shake a little bit. That's it. She's home. And
It's actually a really clever gizmo.
it's really nice, yeah, and they're super cheap. Because if not, you're gonna have to feed that thing on with a screwdriver or however else you can get them rings up in the cylinder. Okay, push the intake boot into the carb box. I like to get all 4 bolts started before I start actually running them down, so I always go over with by hand, and I'll just give them a little bit of a twist. Okay, so cylinder's on, and we're ready to put the muffler. Okay, and now with the muffler's going back on. There. This is one of the original bark boxes, fuse welded, and this is the old 16 gauge.
That was one of the first ones you made.
Yeah.
The saw's kind of evolved over the years as you come out with products,
Okay, so now cylinder's on, everything's good there. I'm gonna put a decompression plug in this cylinder, and then you don't have to worry about any leaks anymore. These are nice, come with a little sealer ring in there. It goes into the place of your decompression plug.
Yeah, I don't need that anyways.
Yeah, not with big arms.
Big arms.
Them big arms you got.
Yeah, who needs that? It's interesting though, so over time though, that wears out and you start to lose compression through the whole hole.
They actually hold up pretty good for
Yeah.
what they are, Get that good and snug. Yeah, so that little valve is just,
Right.
it's just like a little valve, and it just seals off and the compression holds it down. There's really nothing wrong with it. It just started to leak a little bit, you can kind of see. I'm gonna put a new spark plug in this thing. You can see his old plug. It does have some color in it, so it was doing well. It's not white. It has a little bit of tan. So, you remember the last time you changed that? Intake rings back on. Okay, carburetor's going back on. Wouldn't have to do that if the customer would clean his saw before we bring it around here, but you know, you got to deal with these kind of guys.
It's the arborist, you know.
Okay, so fuel lines next
Just don't like to get dirty.
with my big fill pliers, and then I like to hold that down right there and take the pliers, walk that right back up on there. And that's done. This goes back here. We're almost ready to roll.
Are we gonna change out the filter?
The filter's not bad.
It's not. I think I kind of recently
Yeah, it's not
replaced
bad.
it actually.
I took it off. I was like, oh, that's not bad.
Okay.
See if my new wire goes down. Yep, there she goes. It's not that bad. So you just cleaned it.
Yeah, I think I just replaced it not long ago.
This is another good tip here. If you're gonna run one of these max flows, it's always good to get another sponge bushing. These usually come with one bushing. I like to stack up two. That's why his got two on. I think I did that for you.
Well, you must have.
Last
I
time
don't know
I was
about that.
in
Where do you get the second one?
Still,
Oh, okay.
yeah. And it seals off the center there. You can see it squishing.
Mm-hmm.
Because what'll happen is the material will come through the center here. There's that. One last thing I'm going to do. I'm going to put one of these. I'm going to get that part number there. These go on the 661s. This thing keeps your bolt from getting damaged when the chain gets throwed. So that little guy goes right in there. And then when your chain's riding, it's riding on this instead of when it throws off, hitting the top of your bolt. Because a lot of these get really damaged. It's kind of a nice little item to put on. Okay, gas and oil, and we're ready.
What about the oil filter? What are your thoughts on that? Like, you don't want to replace that. I've also heard if you run gas through your oil tank, that can clean it.
You know, I've never had a problem with getting oil through that filter.
Yeah.
But the tank obviously is getting a lot of crap when you're dumping stuff in, especially out cutting every day. You open this thing up and you're like, oh, all this stuff just pouring into there. There's no getting around it. So I've heard of guys putting gas in there and actually running it and running their saw, and you know, the bar running on the chain causes a spark. I've seen guys catch fire.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Probably not a good idea. But if you dumped it in there,
I've done it before.
Cause a fire?
No, I never caught on fire. I've heard it. I heard if you put straight gas in there, it catches fire, but the mix doesn't catch fire so easy. But mix is pretty flammable.
Yeah. So I don't know if I would
that's
actually
true.
run the gas through it, but probably dumping some gas in there and letting it sit
Swish
and then dumping
around.
it back out
Yeah.
probably wouldn't be a bad idea to get your oil tank clean again.
Yeah, that makes sense. This
That's
thing's oiling
definitely-
good still.
Sometimes I'll be out there and I'll just get to the bottom of the tank and I'll just dump the oil out, dump a quarter of my tank out on the ground along with all the chips and everything else, and then just start going.
Right, right.
I do that sometimes.
It's a good idea.
The environmentalists didn't hear that, but
Yeah. I don't think a lot of them watch this this channel.
they might on your channel.
Certainly not. Yeah,
They don't watch on my channel.
Certainly not this deep into the video.
No.
they've already left the video. Yeah, on my channel.
So you got bar oil in there right now, so I'm gonna put a bar and chain on this thing because otherwise there's gonna be oil everywhere when we start it.
What do you do? What are you doing?
So we're
there?
cleaning Jacob's bar because he doesn't clean it. The oiler hole is completely closed. Oh, that one's open.
Cause I cleaned it. Maybe.
So this is just one of my depth plates, and you just run it down and clean the rail out. His rail really isn't that dirty, but
Because I clean it. It's not that bad.
And then the other thing you want to take a look at on these bars, they'll get burred edges, and especially these still lightweights, they're kind of concaved. So if you take a flat file and you run across here, this edge is high on both sides. Like right there, you can feel it. Good thing to run a flat file across in that area.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about the bar. Like, we're tuning up the chainsaw. We didn't even talk about, that's a whole thing on its own. I mean, that bar's pretty good, but
This bar's pretty good shape, but
yeah.
we need to do a bar video.
We need to do a video, yeah, we
I
should.
think a bar video would be nice. How to tune up a bar, what to look for.
We should get an old busted up bar and
We'll just call Garrett, he's got a ton of them.
there you go. All right, bar and chain's going back on.
You can see
That's cool.
my little guide
Yeah.
keeps the chain really nice and square. It probably helps from throwing the chain, I would think,
Yeah.
because it's not wallering around headed back into the sprocket. So
These are Gordy's parts. This is his side cover, his 3-point dogs, and his bark box on there.
oh, let's go start her up. Any guess to how many times it's gonna take? Just out of fuel.
So Gordy tuned up my 661, and I had this tree to fall on Monday. It did it Friday, and I had a tree to fall on Monday. And I was like, "Hey, Gordy, you should just come with me, and we'll just end this video. I fall this tree, you know, with the 661." And I was gonna put that in this video, but it ended up being actually really interesting, and it actually took a long time to cut the tree. It didn't go like we like we expected it to. So the saw run's good. I'm gonna do another video. Just because it'd be too much to try to squeeze into this one. So the saw run's good, and then I'll do another video where we fall this tree, and it was like crazy stubborn. It was actually kind of stressful, but that'll be later. But anyways, the saw run's good. You can check out the next video to see us fall. It's like a 40-inch dead hemlock. I think it actually turned out pretty cool. So thanks for everything, Gordy.
You bet, bud.